before we really dig deep into the whole legacy thing, we always like to just take a few minutes to just have a chat. So, aside from any legacy shenanigans, what brought you into Blood on the Clock Tower, Tyler? Tell us a bit about yourself and
I played it.
your past with the game.
Yeah. I saw it on when the Shucks video or the Shut Up and Sit Down review came out while the Kickstarter was live. I backed it then. I really wanted to play this game, and so I went to a convention in Vancouver, Canada, um, on a date. So I'd met somebody at a wedding. We decided to go out, but we lived in different states. So we decided, let's meet up in Vancouver, go to a game convention. A little weird, but it was fun. And we mostly went to play Blood on the Clock Tower and spend time with each other. So that was the first time I got to play it. We came back and made a homebrew copy that I ran poorly for some of our friends. But that was right before COVID. Then COVID hit, and I had set up a Facebook group for the local area, and that's why somebody from TPI, I think Adam, if I think back, I think Adam Birch was trying to do a spotlight on different local groups across the US and Europe. And so initially they were like, hey, can your whole group come on? And I was like, my whole group has played a game, I think, to this point. So I'm not sure that that's going to click. But I started coming on the streams when they ended the US stream the first time around because of some scheduling availability. I volunteered myself. Capelli, who y'all know real well, volunteered himself at the same time, and they paired us together. And we've been rivals, enemies, frenemies, lovers ever since.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I got into it, I guess.
I do want to take a moment on that note to say that this stream, I probably wouldn't be here without you, Tyler, and of course Capelli, who brought me into the Sunday streams. So yeah, thank you for that. It's been a great experience. I've met a lot of excellent people, and that might not have happened without you.
I love that. I love feeling or getting that kind of feedback because I think there was a lot of people that I first met through playtesting Legacy. And then prior to that, I would periodically just go on unofficial and just sit and listen to people play. And that was kind of where I found folks that I was like, I think this could be a good, person for our stream. It got tough scheduling because we were kind of committed to a Sunday night time slot, and we needed to find dynamic people who were good to be around and good players, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I really appreciate players like you who kind of took a chance on us too, because we were an unknown quantity to a certain extent. Capelli I think had more storyteller or street cred than I did, but especially when it comes to Legacy, we were really trying to do some new and interesting stuff. So I think that was a risk for the players to end up kind of looking silly, which is why we had, that was another thing. Some of the great play testers, like Navean, but then, we had some great play testers in that group. Art, Link Soul, Emily, who's doing Clock Tower Con. Oh my goodness.
Jan's there.
Jan, oh my God, I love playing with Jan. That's how I met. Oh Jesus.
Jams was in that group, right?
Jams. That's how I met Jams. That's how I met Bardic. A lot of the folks that kind of off doing their own things in the wider Clock Tower community. That's how I got introduced to them. And I really appreciate that experience and getting their feedback, because it was really some of the things we were only able to test in like bits and pieces, especially the finale. They were having to spend a whole evening going like, so what are we doing? I was like, I just want to know if when you click this thing happens.
Yeah, the first time we played the finale scenario, it was literally just like, making the function work. And then did we end up like purposefully setting off a boom dandy or something like that? I can't remember exactly what we did, but we truncated the game quite short because most of our time was spent testing the bot functions.
Well,
Well, and I think going back to that one, not to get ahead of ourselves, we want to
yeah,
talk about that, but
we're getting ahead of ourselves by
the
about 3 months, but that's okay.
sure. Well, let me just to Navian's point there. What got truncated is my original idea for Legacy series was that every Fabled would be featured in a script. Right, that was originally the premise. Is that every bit of Clock Tower that we knew at that point would be featured somewhere in the campaign, and I was like, oh, I got it. It all ends on a fiddler. And so I did this whole thing, and
Ooh.
people went through this whole experience. And then I was like, and now we're fiddling. And the playtester was like, that's just dumb. It's awful. I was like, no, it's great. It's genius. It's not. And they were right. I was wrong. So that
Maybe
was
you should
very
have
helpful.
started with that one.
Yeah, I'd start with a fiddler.
Yeah.
That would have been. I think that probably would have gotten a lot of people off the boat early. So
Nothing wrong with a
says
fiddle.
something about the fiddler, I think.
Yeah, it's a good tool, but it is very much a tool for its place. It's quite hard to build a script around a fiddler. But yeah, we'll talk about that sort of design philosophy soon. You mentioned briefly, Clock Tower Con. Well, people can still get tickets to that. There are new tickets available. Go look up the Kickstarter. It's all there. And from what you were saying, maybe a great place to have a date. Why not? Bring your partner.
Romantic Washington, D.C.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never been to Washington, D.C. or any of the states. So, yeah. Hopefully I'll be
Well, you
there.
should make the trip, Alejo.
Hopefully I will. Hopefully I will. We shall see. Navy and I might have an announcement about that at some point in the future, but we will see. But yeah, there's another question that I always like to ask people. I don't know if you've seen any script notes, Tyler, up to now. Probably not. Been a bit off your radar.
Unfortunately, I have not. I feel bad now.
No, that's
I
fine.
thought it was something I could download, but
That's
I need
fine.
to.
About half of them are on YouTube.
Okay.
But yeah, I always like to ask one question, which is, what's the best base script?
Well, they each teach you something different. So it's all about what your temperament and what you need to. I hate to say, maybe it sounds pretentious to say learn about the game, but I mean, like, I guess we're being pretentious because we're doing a podcast about a game.
Absolutely.
It's they each try to teach you something different. For me, the thing that the experience that I like best, or that I feel like I intuit better, comes from BMR. So for me, Bad Moon Rising is the script in the base 3 that I lean to the most. Trouble Brewing is there to teach you about some of the core mechanics of the game, and that most of your information, or a lot of your information, can be subverted. So you can neither discount it and you can't read it as the gospel. BMR teaches you about watching players and their reaction to events that go on around you, and trying to tease out what the conditions show you about what you're up against as a town. And then it teaches you a lot about, from my perspective, if you're the demon, how you obscure or obfuscate what demon you are, because that helps you improve your chances of winning. And then Sex and Violets is a bit of a different game, live to online, but online it's very puzzly. It's very good for the puzzle solvers, but I think in person it's a lot of chaotic fun. Just a bunch of, oh man, I got turned into this, which is pretty neat. So
Yeah,
for me, it's BMR, at least in the online setting. I think I actually have a lot more favorable view of Sex and Violets when running it live or playing it live in person.
Yeah, you are, of course, the great pacifist defender.
I think I've been broken of that
Really?
after a game the other day. But that was, I should never have gone philo pacifist. What was I thinking?
Oh, was that? Did I see that game? Was that a streamed game?
Yeah, they did. It was when they were doing
Yeah.
the Clock Tower Con
I thought
fundraiser.
so.
So
Yeah, that was.
I still think, well, and I think pacifist is one of those things where You're saying, "Hey, I trust you, storyteller." And then when your storyteller says, "Well, you shouldn't have. You should have thought twice about that." Well, and then you learn. You learn.
Who was storytelling
He
that
could have.
game?
He
This
could
is
have saved
this
the
is a call
mayor.
out.
He could have saved the mayor. Is all I'm saying.
Absolutely could have
Anyway,
saved the mayor, but didn't save the mayor.
he did not save the mayor.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. Do you remember any of your early games of Clock Tower? What you were in your first game?
I want to say I have that con was a little bit of a blur. I'm pretty sure I was a. They were doing a lot of drunk investigators in those early con games. They had kind of a set format that they were doing, but I feel like I was a librarian in one of them.
Sure.
And the first game I have a really good memory of, and it's probably because I won, but it was like a 20-player Trouble Brewing where I was the imp. It was the first time I'd drawn an evil character and in a big group setting to boot. And yeah, it was. It had a. I had a really smart minion who I had to keep killing my minions at night, and I killed her, and she came out as the Raven Keeper who saw one of the other final three as the demon, and that cinched us for it. So credit goes to her on that particular win. But that was the first game I really remember. Was the old imp win.
Fair enough. Well, congrats on that.
And then the first game I
yeah.
played on stream, I was the minstrel. I look back at it now because it was pretty funny. I was a minstrel who went and tried to tell all these Brits that I trusted them because nobody had been drunk, because when they had been executed, no one was drunk. And that made me look even more suspicious to them. So,
Oh, no.
yeah. Jack
Classic.
had me killed.
Classic minstrel behavior. Classic Jack behavior.
That's right.
He does that.
That's class.
Jack does that.
Yep.
Gets people
I was out
killed.
of my depth.
Yeah, I remember some of my first streamed games. Although I didn't actually come on stream to play Blood on the Clock Tower originally. Weirdly, I played Shadowhunters with you first.
That's right. That's right. That game
played,
that Tony and Capelli were really into.
Played exactly once and then never again. Because I think that was pretty much the last Friday board game that got played, or second to last or whatever. Because it died quite quickly after that.
You murdered Friday game day.
I did.
Alejo.
I did. That is.
I think it was Shadow. To be honest with you, I know y'all were really passionate about Shadowhunters, and I want to go deep in the weeds. But that game was. That game had a lot of like, oh well, if you know, you know, and I was like, but I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. So,
yeah, that's fair. I might have murdered not Shadowhunters Friday board games, but I am the professor because I've resurrected it, and you and people can watch us play board games on Fridays over at my place.
nice.
Anyway, we are a little pressed for time because we're doing this in Tyler's lunch hour ish. So we'll talk about what we're here to talk about, which is some script building, and in particular some legacy script building. How do you? Because you have also built a lot of regular scripts. I think it's fair to say. What's your sort of overall philosophy on script building? And then after that, how did that differ when you were talking about for something as unusual, shall we say, as the legacy games? What's your general philosophy?
I think, well, I mean, I think you have to once again go back to like, what is this script trying to evoke or teach you, or is it trying to create a pattern of play, right? Is it trying to? And I won't say this has always been my way of thinking, but as I've I've built hundreds of scripts now, some that were played once, some that have been played a bunch, but I think they all kind of go into that vibe of like, what is it we're trying to get at? Are we trying to break a play style loop, right? Because people will say, well, there's a, and I don't think anybody here in this conversation would agree to this. But there are people that kind of go, well, there's a right way to play this, there's a right way to do this, and you just got to do this, and all those kinds of things. And so I think a good script can help break some of those tendencies because now there are new combinations, new pairings, new things that go along with that. But with all those new combinations, new pairings, new interactions, you have pitfalls that you may not have anticipated as a script writer. So I do kind of you get a little checklist in your mind, like, oh, if I have a pit hag, I need to make sure I know exactly what's on this script because of the interactions where they're making rolls that I did not see coming, right? Or is there a clear favorite for what the philosopher ability would be, and things like that. I mean, I think we saw a lot of common scripts um, early on, and I still see them every once in a while where you'll have a poppy grower, a cannibal, a philo,
Ah,
um,
Poppycraft
a
Cannibal,
pixie.
everyone's
Yeah,
favorite.
any of the those four roles, you're basically just guaranteeing that the the evil team is not going to have an ability to communicate with each other. Now, if that's if the script is also predicated around that in other ways, then I guess you can try for it. But it seems to just be frustrating, altogether.
That's we had Ed on Ed Gabriel on a couple of weeks ago. So there's
I've
quite
heard of him. Yeah,
you know him. Yeah, you've met.
he's a good
Um,
guy.
yeah, so it's interesting to get that the difference there between philosophies. Um, you're coming at that from quite an angle of what can we like learn here, what can we uh, but then also what do we need to avoid here. Um, Whereas yeah, Ed's philosophy seemed to be a little bit different, but I think it's interesting then to see because Navian and I spoke of our philosophies as well, and I think we've got four quite distinct but also similar um, ideas. So it's interesting to see like how one person approaches something where one person differs, and yet still, I like to think that the four of us are, okay at script building.
Sure. No, I think so. All award winners in our
Yeah,
own right, right?
uh,
Um,
not me.
I think you didn't win an award. I'm sure you won one of those.
I did not. Not a
Okay.
Thursday one anyway. You played one of my scripts, but
Oh,
it didn't win the big prize.
that's an award.
I suppose so.
An award. Uh, I got you. No, I think it's um, well, I have evolved into this state. I think a lot early on, I was a lot more. And I know that this differs for me than from other people too. I get really deep into the theming, and it played into what ended up happening with Legacy, which I really get um, caught up or ensnared by the names of roles and whether or not they're connected to their ability. Like, what does that have to do with what it does mechanically? And other people just go, shut up and play the game.
Hmm.
But I do. I get really wrapped up in the theming of what the experience should be like, feel like, um, how the rules support that, and that along with that kind of plays into some of the scripts I've done. I've done some fun scripts where it was, where I'll take people's like personal life experiences, like Adam and Haley were telling me about how their first date, and it was their anniversary. So I turned their first date and anniversary into a script called "I Gave Up
That's
21
really
Jumps for
sweet.
Lent." Yeah, it was sweet, and it was a fun script too. And same thing when Capelli went away for his. He missed one stream, I think, for getting married, uh, and I made a wedding script for him as a little present. So that's kind of how I approach it, or I did, and I mean I still do. I like the theming, but I do think there are some precepts you can keep an eye on when you're building a script, which I learned from. I used to share my scripts anytime I made them with people like Maniac and Jack, and then some other people as time went on. But initially, I would send it to both of them and be like, "What did I miss?" And they'd kind of give me the rundown, and it was up to me at that point to go like, "I actually think it's bad that this and this play off each other, or there's friction between these two roles." There's some people that I've seen, they'll say things like, I would never put, um, they just, they won't put a poisoner on a script with like a balloonist or something. I was like, okay. Then all your scripts will end up being kind of flat. They'll end up kind of being the same. Um, sometimes you have to have some variance in there from my point of view. Um, Otherwise you can just end up getting into your this is my unless you just want to play your perfect script, the thing that feels best for you all the time, which is fair enough. I think that is a valid thing to do.
No, that's interesting. Because I think that's one of the things that we look at when we're talking about scripts on this podcast is what are the potentially rough combinations of characters, and yeah, that sort of thing is. I think you're talking about things that we would quite often highlight as being potentially something that might lead to a rough game. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
think. Well, I mean, and it goes back to kind of like who are you building it for, right? What are you trying to do? Um, if you have a group and you play together a lot and you see certain things crop up, certain tendencies, certain play styles, and you want to break from that or say, well, you could think about it differently. If the circumstances were changed, the optimum quote unquote play would now be different. If you're running it for a group of people, if you're trying to play test your script for a group of folks that you just assembled online, you say, hey, will you play my script? Then maybe that's not you don't want those things because you don't even know what their internalized beliefs about the game or what they think is best or whether or not it's just going to be frustrating. So yeah, I think it can go either way. But some hard and fast rules, I was like, well, I think that ended up, I noticed there was a little bit of that when people were making scripts for the World Cup. There was such truisms that some of the scripts to me ended up looking very, very similar. And I didn't know what would really even separate them other than the events of that particular game.
I think this is something that came up a little bit when we were talking with Ed, where I spoke about I don't ever take any script writing advice as a hard and fast rule. I think when you take things as rules that you have to follow, you can absolutely end up in that area where your scripts are going to stagnate. They're guidelines, and sure, sometimes there are guidelines for a reason, but there are also times and places where breaking a guideline makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah, I think I was so I got to think about the Al Hadik a lot. That's my favorite demon. It has some limitations, right? Because there's no other demon that looks like an Al Hadik, so you really don't want to make a script with a bunch of, why make a script with a bunch of demons on it necessarily? Because they're not going to pattern that. So I tried to think about what would make a really strong Al Hadik script. And it turns out the best way to make your Al Hadik pop and be very effective is to make all the townsfolk really, really good, don't want to die. Right. And the same thing for your outsiders. If you have a mix of 50% of these roles they'd be fine with dying, and taking that bullet for town. Well, then what you'll have is the Al Hadik killed one person each night. And considering the Al Hadik doesn't have mobility, it lacks certain things. The prisoner's dilemma is not very strong if people kind of have that sense of things. But if everybody goes, hey, my role has value, and I want to see it come to fruition, then when asked, do they want to live or die, they tend to choose live. And I think that makes that particular demon pop. So I think the conventional wisdom would be don't put these super heavy townsfolk all over your script. But when paired with the Al Hadik, it really ended up turning out really, really well as an overall concept. So yeah, I mean, I think that kind of plays into you gotta think about what you're matching up, what's your centerpiece, what are you trying to convey? Are you trying to highlight a certain minion or a demon? I think about roles sometimes the psychopath is one of those roles that I think is fun and people like it, but it doesn't win very much. And it ends up kind of being a detriment sometimes to your team. So sometimes I'll think about a script as what would make the psychopath really both fun and work as a winning minion for a given team, or what would make the mastermind be more fun than it currently feels like it is sometimes. So that's kind of how I think about scripts nowadays. How do I make something more fun, more playable? Now that the conventional wisdom for the community at large is set in, we had we had people ranking all of their clock tower roles for themselves and all that kind of stuff. We did it on OffMeta. We gave things grades and tier lists, and even though that's kind of a, um, I don't know, an illusionary thing, but you know, how can we create a script that makes people rethink what they perceive that role to be? What can make something pop that otherwise wouldn't?
Yeah, and for a similar discussion that both I and Navian referenced, do go check out our discussion from a couple of weeks ago, which I think I've just put, hopefully should have been uploaded to YouTube by the time we started this. If not, it should be by the end of today. I haven't checked. But yeah, you talked quite a bit towards the start of that about theming, and I think that is something that you really lent into for the scripts that we're going to be talking about today and legacy and so on. Do you want to talk about how that influenced um, your legacy script design and what you were going for, like in general, before we necessarily dive too deep into any particular scripts?
Sure. When I started doing Legacy, the original idea is that the events from a given game would then impact what script or where the narrative went. And because the narrative would change, and I wanted there to be a sense of stakes, that would obviously change the script. If no matter what you did, the script for the next game was the same, this was my original thinking. This had to pivot, but if the script was the same no matter what you did, then were there really any stakes? And my answer was no. Your actions had no impact. We just played through a, we just played through a thing. Um, and so that was the original kind of premise. So there was all this stuff about if you think back to that first game, Alejo, there were all these missions for the evil team that
Yeah.
would have an impact on if they got completed, what script would go from there. And so it made it seem like, oh, well, you could replay this again, and if the evil team got fewer missions completed or more missions completed, this is how things would change. And I did have those notes for the early part of the game, but it ended up being like, wow, that's a lot of work for things that no one will ever see. Is in how kind of feeling.
Behind
We
the
had so much
scenes
to
branching.
yeah, all of these branch timelines that no one will ever play. It's not like we're going to publish this. I don't own the copyright to the game, so unless TPI was going to go and do something with it, it would just be like, it's a thing that's on my computer that I had a Navian make art for that no one will ever experience, And I was like, I can't afford it, and I don't have time. So it ended up being more. I ended up having to react, especially when we got to the act breaks. So the act breaks were great for the putting the episodes together and helping people get a break if they had committed to this campaign. But it also helped me because now I have 2 weeks to go. Okay, what do I want to do in the next act? What do I want it to be? And so theming obviously was very important because if I was saying I want them to go through this journey through like a haunted Arcadia type of thing, then I'm gonna have a lot of stuff with fairy connotations, the pixie and the I don't actually think this is what they mean by puka, but puka over here is a invisible uh, fairy thing, and then Serenovis, some other different things that I kind of all linked together as this kind of Arcadian time, plot that never ever got seen. But those roles ended up being linked together. They were the centerpiece. And so as we get into these other scripts, I still kept thinking about what is the centerpiece for this script, what can make it, what works with it. Um, the delirious dancing. Well, I mean, does that answer your question? Do you want me to say anything more about that?
Yeah, I'm curious how much exactly you planned ahead and how much you sort of were like, okay, that last one's done, and then these things happen in it. So now I'm going to decide what I'm going to do from here, um, based off what you just said. So, like, how much were you like, okay, I want to get 2 weeks in advance so that I've got sort of an idea of where we're going, or how much was it? Um, a general picture of where you were going in the end, and how much of it was just, all right, we're going to do this week's, and then after we're done this week's, we're going to do next week's, and sort of chopped up like that.
Initially, I had 6 weeks of, or not 6 weeks, but I had six installments with all their branching timelines.
Sure.
Um, None of that ever played out. So the only ones that ended up playing out was the first episode, and then it did inform the second script for Lost in the Woods. And it felt like we were at a certain point. I was pitching things to Marshall, who helped me a lot on this, while you know while we were thinking about what was going to be the next week. Delirious Dancing, for instance, came together. I mean, I really think literally the week before we, played it on stream, because it was. I knew that I wanted to do the time periods. So that the Legacy of Ravenswood Bluff, if you go back and watch it, each of the acts is set in a time period in a place, right? So it's the expedition to recover the old homeland, the building of now there's a city, a prosperous city that's kind of like a colonial power, right? That's there. And then the last act is this state of empire, right? So these all have different kind of focuses. And the first one is, about being, about being unmoored, about being lost. So they are they are betrayed in the first one. They don't have as many places to go in and whisper. That was kind of the mechanic that kind of hemmed them in. And then the second game is they're all separated from each other and they got to get back together. That script is actually, I like that script a lot, the Lost in the Woods one. And then the third one, the time loop script, they're lost in time, right? They're replaying these events until something, snaps them out of it. So I mean, like that's kind of the first act, and I think the time loop thing was something I knew I wanted to do at some point, but I think it ended up just being like, well, we need to do it in the first act because it's been tested, and that became really that became kind of the standards. Like, have we even play tested this? Have we play tested it? We never play tested it enough, right? We didn't have enough time, but it was, have we at least tried it? Do we know what it looks like? Do we know the format? Did people enjoy it? Which got to be a little deceptive. Playtesting is interesting when you play test it with one group and their needs are one thing, right? Or they're playing in an exploratory way or an enjoyment way, and then people are playing on stream and they're, I mean, for better for worse, especially in those early days, there weren't a lot of streams going. People didn't want to look silly, people didn't want to be embarrassed or lose the game in front of 120 people or whatever it was, watching the live thing. So I think it changed the way that they interacted with it sometimes. I know Alejo would have to speak more to that. I don't think Alejo was ever fazed by that as a player. I didn't see that in them, but in other players, I did see a marked difference between them and the playtest group.
I don't think it's ever really been my thing to be too caught up with that sort of necessarily. Oh, I have to win this, but that's some people see things differently, I'm sure. I think it wasn't really until I'm not sure which one it was. Was it? It wasn't a House Divided. I think it might have been The House That Haunts Us. When I really decided to throw a little bit of a wrench into your finely crafted plans and just straight up lie about what you were doing.
I thought that was interesting because I think some of the playtesters had talked about what happens when people start making up legacy mechanics as a bluff. And, I think you'd play it like anything else where you support the possibility, but I think it is tougher, right? Would you as a storyteller do this? I was like, I guess I could,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I didn't.
That creates a lot of other avenues and that happened, I think we've seen it a lot, or I've seen it a lot with like atheist games, amnesiac games, you end up asking a lot of questions about what the storyteller would be willing to do. Um, so I think this may have been the first not the first, but a similar incarnation to that.
Yeah, maybe. Um, yeah, it's one that people had to judge for themselves. Am I did that actually happen? Did I really receive the drunk token? And then a couple of other players tried to do it later, or I think Low might have tried to do it twice after that. I'm not sure.
Lowe
It
did an
sounds like a
interesting
very low
thing.
thing to do. Yeah.
I think they did it in the final, the
Well, Lowe
finale.
did it in. I don't know if they did it in the finale. I know that they did it sort of in the next game in the House Divided.
Yeah.
Because but it wasn't that they made something up whole cloth, right? They misrepresented a legacy mechanic in a way that ultimately benefited them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the twins one, right?
Yeah.
That was the twins wins, which I'm sure it brings me a lot of joy, but I don't think it brought everybody joy. But that also that experience, the House Divided game, and then and some of the kind of the nebulous or the ambiguity that comes with people being able to say like this thing happened to me, and if you don't know that it happened, like that's on you. The feedback we got from the players on stream was they wanted a better concrete sense of what rules they were up against at any given time. And so I think as you see that in the final act and the finale, it was meant to be a lot clearer, what was going on.
Yeah, that was
What
definitely discussed on Andrew's podcast, the concept of, these like hidden objectives and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess it's a sense of whether or not it's more of a. I mean, I've played a lot of legacy games. I think a lot of legacy games, you don't always know the consequences of the decision you're making. So you're making a decision that you think is right or moral or in line with your goals, objectives at the time, and then they might end up having negative side effects down the road.
Yeah.
So that was
That makes
playing
sense.
into. Yeah, I mean that was playing into what I was doing. And I think but once again, it kind of goes back to the different play styles. I think the play testers, they were very excited for the mystery box style exploratory game. I went in this thing happened. What? They were into that. Whereas I think the players and it could just be, it might not have anything to do with it being on stream. It could have just been their sensibility versus the other people. We tried to widen the net. With playtesting, I think we ended up having, 60 unique playtesters. Not for every game, but for all the different things that we tried. So it wasn't just the same group every time. But their needs and desires were different, and so we tried. That was the other thing is I ultimately tried to make the legacy game because what people were seeing was what was being streamed on the Sunday. I tried to make it more tailored to the sensibilities of the players that were in it. They were the ones having to experience it and in express enjoyment, or that's what you hope, right? You want them to be like, oh my gosh, I love it. You don't want them to be like, oh, that happened. So yeah, so I started changing some of the designs around those folks, Alejo included.
Yeah, I for myself really enjoyed the what you brought in from I think game 4, because that I feel like really let me treat it as something of an RPG, and I think that there's always connections to be made between Blood on the Clock Tower and tabletop role playing games, but I think that the the houses really fed into that. I think it's fair to say.
I
Yeah, the
wanted to do
noble
more of
houses.
that. Go ahead, Navean. Sorry.
The noble houses that were there were 2 people per house, and there were 3 houses. So half of the game were these like nobles, and then the other half were just like the common folk. And that really, I think, for both the playtest group and the stream group, that really kind of split the social lines of the game.
Yeah,
It's neat how that happens. I don't know if that's neat for anybody else. I like that kind of like, this is arbitrary.
As the demon in the playtest game, it worked very well for me. Yeah.
I don't remember what
Navean
I was.
at one point in a playtest game had the bureaucrat and thief ability.
Really?
I did.
Only trusted player, just about. So.
It was amazing.
Oh, you mean you were selected by the bureaucrat and the thief, not that you were the bureaucrat and the thief.
No,
well, no. Remember in that scenario, the common folk would get to decide who had the thief ability.
Oh yeah.
And then the nobles got to decide who had the bureaucrat ability, and both groups
I had both.
independently chose Navean.
Amazing.
Yeah. So our common folk group were sat there talking, and I think I was the last one of us alive, so I had to have the ability by default. And we're discussing like who should we put this on and all of that, and then Tyler comes back into our group, and I'm like, no, I know, Tyler, I need to give you a name, but we're still discussing. Give me one more second. And then Tyler goes, oh no, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to tell you that you're this. And I was like, what? It was really funny.
Well, and I think the interesting things from those games was I mean, it sounds really, like, once again, it sounds real pretentious, but a lot of those scripts were built around the idea, or the mechanics was like how power will cozy up to awful things if they feel like it'll help them sustain power.
That makes a lot of sense, and I'm very happy that I, in one of the playtests, got to embody that completely.
Yeah. So like all the individual houses, they wanted the demon to live, right? And they were like, well, you can eat these common people, but I want my house to stay sustained, right? And it's tricky. It was tricky to do that. I don't think it played out pretty dramatically and interestingly on in playtest, and I don't think it was bad on the stream, but it wasn't as like intense, having everybody kind of having a marionette that didn't know they were the marionette, having the demon be so trusted, along with the fact that the good noble people were like, well, I kind of know who the demon is, so I'm gonna go after somebody else. Like, all that stuff is very interesting, but it's not everybody's version of interesting, right? Because if you're like, I'd like to play this and win this game of Blood on the Clock Tower, that creates a bunch of wrinkles that maybe you weren't interested in or weren't prepared for. You weren't interested in my political messaging at the time.
I really enjoyed that. I remember.
Thank you.
I was one of the common folk, and I think I went the entire game without talking to a member of the nobility or voting on a member of the common folk. It was a weird one, but it was
fun. But yeah, I think, so before we touch on Delirious Dancing, I think the script that when I look back at these, thank you so much. Love you. The one that I am probably like most, when I look at it and I go, wow, that was a pretty good design, was the House Divided, was the one that like people are I think people are a little polarized on.
really,
because of the hidden twin condition. But in terms of like a design that I look at and I go, you've got two towns that are working independently that have these kind of parameters. There are some things that work globally. I thought those were all interesting things. And the way that it made different towns feel, and express how they played, like all of that was very interesting to me. And it made the emissary thing pretty cool, because I can just go and the information that I have locked up in my town, if I can cross this DMZ and tell you this is what we're seeing over here, that can help you solve the puzzle on your side, right? So there's now multiple ways for evil to obfuscate things. And there's also multiple ways for good to get information. All kinds of neat little wrinkles in that one. and then the way that the Zombul and the Leviathan interact, because I don't think the Zombul, like the Leviathan's popular for a lot of people, but then there's other people who don't like the Leviathan at all. I like the Leviathan. The Zombul is normally rated as people's one of their least favorite demons, if not their least favorite. So having them kind of interact in a way that I thought made them both more interesting, more synergistic. I feel really good about that.
I really enjoyed the premise of that. And I think you're right. I think so. I love the Leviathan. I'm not the biggest fan of Zambul, but I think that the way that you had those playing both like sort of with slash against slash to each other in these split up teensies was really fascinating.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think that was a play test in which I think wasn't always the case, and I don't say that lightly. It wasn't always the case that the playtest made the end result better, because sometimes the playtest was so much fun and everybody had such a good time that their feedback was like, "Don't change anything," which ended up being wrong. Something needed to be changed. We just didn't catch it, right? And that happens. Like that's why you playtest a bunch. But that one's one where we found something that I was like, "Oh, this was still a good experience. There were still good things that happened out of it, but this thing that we learned from it." Also made the end result a lot more fun.
Yeah, we ended up. I think the biggest feedback that we gave was something to do with like who could hear the widow's call, because we had the twins that were split up amongst between the two towns, and our side had heard the widow's call, and so we got the ruling from you that like the side that hears the widow's call is the side that has the widow on it. And as a result, we were actually able to solve that our twin was therefore definitely the good twin. And so the twins stood very little chance to get their potential twin win as soon as our twin outed, "Hey, I'm a good twin." And so I think, that was our biggest feedback was, if you make the widow be like heard in the town of the player who is poisoned as opposed to just the town that the widow is in. I think that was the change that got made, or it might have been the widow's call heard anywhere. But the point is that, by changing that, it made the twins much harder to solve and would give the twins much more opportunity.
That was a big change. Another big change from that was because the Leviathan side had solved they'd found their demon pretty early.
Yeah,
right?
They had a clockmaker number that solved it for them.
Yeah. And some other, I not messed up, but I probably could have run it a little bit differently with the lunatic situation. There was a couple other things, but yeah, they solved it real quick based on clockmaker information, like you're saying. And they were like, once they had eliminated the Leviathan, they could just freeze out the Zombul on the other side, but on the original rules, by just being like, well, we'll just keep executing. So,
Right, yeah.
And it caused it changed the rules where if the Leviathan were to be to be executed, then the Zombul would act independently at that point, which I think was another big change. The toy maker, we ended up having a special rule for the toy maker Fabled that was on display in that game.
Yeah.
As it applied to the Leviathan. So a lot of good things came out of that playtest experience.
I think I was the Zombul.
Were you the Zombul?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think. Well, and there was you and Bejbo barber swapped, I think, at one point too, right? I think that was that game.
Possibly, yeah, I think you're right. So we could get an extra widow poison then.
I will be editing it pretty soon here to put up online, so hope I'll have jogged my memory by then.
Sure. Oh, it's going up.
Yeah, I've been meaning to. People have been asking about when they could watch it. Originally, it was going to go on the TPI YouTube, and then they said they didn't want any
homebrew, basically.
They didn't want any non-canonical. They didn't want any non-base 3 scripts up there for a while, but they moved on that. But then ultimately said they didn't want any homebrew or alternate mechanics. So yeah, so I'm doing some editing, polishing them up a little bit, and then we're gonna
So is that gonna go
put them up over on OffMeta?
OffMeta, yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like the perfect
Yeah,
spot for it.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because it's weird. But I've also been working on a. I don't know if we. Well, I'll talk about that later. All right.
Okay, okay.
I like that
Before we
script.
do go on to talk about the last few scripts, I have a question about the Houses of the Unholy. Um, that I
Okay.
never asked you, which is just how did you choose the houses? Did you pull them out of a hat, or was it something to do with the previous game, like who was in them?
What did that have to do with? It was not. It was not out of a hat, and they got to choose. Alejo, I could be wrong, but I think it may have had. We had a kind of hidden scoring system that
Ah,
we
of
were
course.
using throughout the game. I don't know if it was tied to that. I have to go back and look at my notes. But at some point we had kind of like a tally, which I know it sounds pretty counterintuitive considering I'm like, well, you should play to have fun and explore. But it's like we're keeping points. Anyway, but we had this thing, and I think that's part of what played into it.
Yeah,
Um,
I've been looking through the document that you posted, and I don't see anything that says this is who is in this house for this reason.
I can go back and look at my well, it would have been a snapshot at the time, but
Sure.
and I don't know if anything. It probably would have been smart to make certain player events do that, but I know that I think it was just the top 6, or where people had played win loss wise in that time period, um, and then they were kind of like paired off
Sure.
and they got to choose their house name and all that kind of good stuff. It would have been
Sure.
cool if they had been like, "Oh, this is this would be good if I ever revise the material." But if you think about it, you go, okay, well, you seed something in the time loop game or in another game where if they do this outcome, then when you come around to the next act, those players now have they're in they share a house because of this link. So, but I
Sure.
wasn't that smart at the time.
Um, yeah, that game I remember followed. Well, I see here followed A Day That Will Die in Infamy, which we touched on briefly. I enjoyed that one. That was so much fun.
I think. Well, I was thinking about that game because I was editing it. So I was thinking about the end of the game, right? How the
Yeah, we kind
status
of
of the players is signaled, and I feel like I've come up with a better way to handle that. Too bad it's like a year late, but
we
um,
kind of ran out of time, I think, on the stream with A Day That Will Die in Infamy.
I think that's what it was. I think it was just like, man, it was running late. Capelli had to work the next day, so it was just like, all right,
Yeah.
let's kind of get to the final day and we'll see how that resolved. But I think there's a more fun and interesting and consequential way to handle it
Okay.
in terms of that. But I'd like to come back to that at some point.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, um, one mechanic that we've discussed later is something that you've revisited quite often off meta, but we'll come back to that as well because A Day That Will Die in Infamy is also a script that you've revisited. I think on your final stream, and that's unfortunately laid one or two of the weaknesses of it as a script to bear. Um, it
yeah, I think
the Zombull on a 1 day script didn't work, and the Slayer was
Oh
uh,
yeah, that was the one where I got Slayer shot, right?
every day.
Multiple times.
Yeah,
And then eventually I got the evil snake charmer snake charmed me.
I
And
believed
we
you.
were all expecting it to revert and it didn't, which
Yeah,
was interesting. And then I got to bluff that the drunk poppy grower was an actual poppy grower, and oh no, I don't know who my team is.
I believed you for basically all of the game. That you were straight up the leech host, and the leech eventually decided to pick someone else. Because you and I were sat next to each other, and obviously I was good because you were the demon, so obviously I was good. Um, but yeah, um,
so. One
but
of
I
the things
think
that you like the flaw there, right? And this comes in like if you're trying to be too wed to the theming, right? I think in the narrative there was some stuff about like there was some stuff that made it to where that was the demon breakdown, and which I obviously could have altered, right? But the you learn a lot about running a script, and that's another thing. If you um, if you hand somebody a script, a custom script with no direction, and you just go away and run it, right? Like the World Cups, their approach to it is say, well, just randomize it. You can make a couple changes, go, right? Um, I think within certain confines, like you can hand a storyteller a pretty bad script and they can make something out of it, right? Because they get to make, if they, especially if they have choices. If a script has no agency for the storyteller, then it is what it is, and you're going along and you're running that domino rally. But otherwise, like the storyteller can do some stuff to move, to sway things either way, make it a lot more fun, like make it a lot more dynamic. Doesn't necessarily mean that the script is good. It means that the script, it can be run. It's got some things on it that can be, can be useful or handy. And I would remark on that sometimes privately, right? But we would get like, we would run some scripts and for that were made for different competitions and stuff. And it was like, there's really one way to run this script that doesn't just like explode, you know? Um, and then other scripts have a lot of flexibility, and I think that's what makes them good. I think that A Day That Will Die in Infamy maybe doesn't have. In some ways, it has flexibility, but there's things that the storyteller has to be bold about doing, right? So if you're gonna have a zombie, then you need to have them die to a doomsay like pretty frequently.
Yeah, otherwise you might end up in the scenario that and that final stream did, where town realized like, oh, we only have one day, which means that if we execute a zombie once, then like we're always going to lose. And so you had to introduce like
Capelli is
uh,
the
a
neutral,
Butcher.
sudden
neutral
butcher, so that town would have the opportunity to double kill somebody.
Hey, I'm a random butcher. What's everybody doing? Yeah, I think that's but that and like you said, that could be say that's a weakness of the script. True enough. It's
It
also
was
it was a
kind of
flaw in
funny,
the
though.
storytelling. Oh no, yeah, I think it was, and in the spirit of, I think I will, like, going back to that finale night, I felt pretty. I was nervous and anxious. It was kind of the end of a thing that was important to me and Capelli, and emotional, and I think it just played into how I was running it. Um, which you should never be. You should just never be emotional. Just be cold, analytical all the time. It'd be good for you.
So on the note of what you were
No.
just saying, how much do you think that you built these scripts to last for a single game, and how much replayability value do you think they have in general? Because I know that you made some changes for some games between the play testing games and the final games, but at the same time, the twin win condition doesn't work if the twins aren't in the game, right? So how much did you build a script knowing this character is definitely going to be in play, and how much were you like, we'll see what the tool gives us, what I'm feeling on the day?
Well, the philosophy changed. The beginning part was it needs to be replayable all the time, so they could have different outcomes. And then, like I said earlier, that became, you know, that was hollow. There was no way that was going to happen. Even though I will say, a renowned RPG writer, Stephen Dewey, he wrote 10 Candles. He replayed the Legacy campaign. He made some modifications and stuff, but ran it mostly from the notes in here. And um, I thought that was pretty interesting, his feedback, and them going through that experience again. Because, like you said, my initial and after that first couple games, my intention was this really only has to, it only has to run once. There only has to be one good way. I think some of the scripts ended up being um, good on their, of their own accord, right? It wasn't the intent that it could be played a bunch, but they, on looking at them, I go, yeah, you could play this. You play it a lot of different ways. You could do some more interesting thing. I found a lot of opportunities in rewatching in rewatching Lost in the Woods and A Day That Will Die in Infamy, where I go, oh, that would have been an interesting, from a storyteller's perspective, I could have done this and I could have done that and I could have had this and I could have taken this out. And man, what would have happened when this occurred, you know? So I think that lends itself to saying the script has a certain measure of replayability. It's hard to say for the houses, because I think the house mechanic made things so it really changed the dynamics a lot for how people would play. Like you said, the kind of social constructs that came along with it. So I don't know how well that would, how much variance you get in the script. If you get really unbalanced, if you make a very heavily like an evil leaning script or leaning setup in the houses scripts, because the houses have so much, they already lean towards evil, at least towards preserving the demon. That triune win condition makes things different. I think you could have run the house divided a couple different ways, but some of it is like, because no role repeats from town to town, that does limit some of what you can do. And then I think it's funny because we're about to talk about it, but Delirious Dancing, I look at the Fabled on this and go, wow, that's like, if I just told you the Fable that are on the script, you go, that's not a very good script. But in terms of like replayability, it works. It's just because for what it does or what it intends to do, it works really well towards that end. The Heirs apparently, I think, is a good solid script. But it wasn't as remarkable to people because it had
that was the one with the multiple apprentices, right?
That's right. Yeah. So and it was a lot of it played around the new players, right? And the experienced players trying to go to them and saying like, you want to get on board for this, or things like that, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, that was that one. One that was trying to show off the angel and the Buddhist, and I guess, I mean, I know it did the, what else did it have? Yeah, angel and the Buddhist mostly.
Yeah, that was a weird one because we were just in the town square getting ready to play the game when so just suddenly 5 random people that none of us know just show up.
Yeah.
Actually,
Well, in that third act, also the scripts didn't have to be like, so normally you'd say like, I want a certain level of drunkenness or poisoning, to cast doubt over certain types of information or things like that. In that third act, what I was looking at was like, oh, there's this war mechanic, right? And so people are going to, that's going to change the way the script would run, because there's going to be this added element of, there could be someone drunk because you didn't fulfill the war mechanic, or, somebody could just die. So that changes a lot of how the script would run on paper out of the context of that war mechanic.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, the cards that you would pull.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, we kept pulling 2s and aces, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, y'all were so damn lucky. I was like, well, this is dumb. All right, well, whatever.
Yeah, the playtests definitely weren't always that lucky.
No. Yeah, so it was just but that was the intention, right? When you look at the script, it's like, okay, well, this should have an impact there. But I think it's, I guess sometimes you got to look at the measure of a script based on like how often good wins, how often evil wins. And most of the scripts, like if you take into account the playtests, I think a lot of them were 50-50, but I don't know on Delirious Dancing, because I don't even think anybody was really keeping track. It was just so silly. Every playtest was silly. The game was silly. So yeah, it's I think that's really what it does well. I mean, we get in the nuts and bolts of the script itself, but like as an idea, I think it's meant to make people go like, hey man, we're all supposed to be having fun. We're supposed to be entertaining each other.
Yeah, for sure. I think I was able to figure out what was happening in DS apparently, because I've always played a lot on the unofficial, still do. And I remember that like a few days before, or like a week or 2 weeks before we were due to play the S, apparently, you put out a you put out a LFG away ping for looking for new players for something that
Yep.
wasn't on that server, and I was like, I'm going to pretend I don't see that.
Yeah, I ultimately I ended up recruiting some people that I knew. One of which now plays a lot on OffMeta, Pepper. But that they hadn't been playing online, and they didn't play much prior to that. So um,
Yeah.
it was pretty funny because one of the the evil travelers, they get to know who the demon was, and one of my friends, John, he tries to go to Andrew the demon and be like, hey, so you're the demon. And Andrew's so used to that level of player where the traveler always claims to see you as the demon, like it was that
Right.
stage of the game, where he's like, yeah, sure, whatever, buddy. And
Who was it? Who was it that
never
pulled?
got into communication.
Who was it that decided to bluff as the apprentice tea lady and had me nominating their neighbors for basically the entire first half of the game?
That was my very smart brother.
Was that Will?
I'm very proud of him. Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
That was Will.
Yeah, he played that brilliantly. He played me brilliantly.
I didn't give him any coaching. I didn't tell him anything about y'all.
um,
So
yeah. So we've been dancing around it for a while, but after that game came the one that we've got on screen right now, which is Delirious dancing at the Coronation Ball. Possibly the with Delirium. Go on, do your thing, Tyler.
delirium is a madness adjacent effect. If you fail to meet its condition, you may die, not executed. That's an important distinction. Your for today for this one we had different dances, right, that were in world kind of thing, like the Anolni waltz and the Luffian waltz and the maybe it was, I don't know if there was a name for it was just the tango. Man, I got so I just ran out of ideas then. I just the tango.
I
And but
now.
it was based off this real thing that happened in around the
Oh yeah,
there
the
was all this kind of like
in Germany, right?
apocalyptic. Well, it happened a lot of places in Europe, oddly enough. But yeah, there was a big outbreak of it in some German towns, usually centered around like this. You know, there'd be these big blips on the radar for like apocalyptic thinking. Um, and I think the 16th century had a big spike in it where people thought the world was going to end pretty soon. And in line with that, there was this like, there's just these outbreaks where people like dance themselves to death. And how macabre is that? But that was kind of I think I was reading about that, and that formed the basis of delirious dancing as an idea because I wanted to, I don't know, it all kind of came together really quickly. Just this sense of like, oh, it'd be fun to um, have these stages, these days where the dance changes at the ball, but the ball never ends, and it's kind of this murder. Like it also had a Mask of the Red Death type of feel vibe to it. That Edgar Allan Poe story.
No,
Um,
I
so all that
remember.
kind of play together.
I remember this game from my perspective. I was the huntsman in this game, and I started right next to the matron, and you never bothered to tell me that I didn't have to, I wasn't delirious when I wasn't sat next to the matron. You never bothered to tell me that, Tyler.
Yeah, I never told people that they were free of being delirious. I just told them if they were afflicted with it. That's true.
Yeah, it's madness adjacent. So it's like madness, where if you're not informed, then it doesn't apply.
That's true.
It was,
But
yeah.
I will say this, Alejo, as you say this almost as a complaint. I think one of the things that people take away from that first game, that first play on stream, was how lyrical you are, how quickly you can write little songs, little ditties, and how good your voice is.
I spent
So
all night
you're
writing
welcome.
them. Spent all night writing them, and then
How could you? How
and
could
then
you have known?
and then the shab didn't resurrect me. You didn't resurrect me with the shab so that I could pick the damsel. I was going to pick the damsel. I was going to be the first person on stream to pick the damsel as the huntsman.
I
And
was
then the
also
Shabloth
a huntsman in my playthrough of this one, and I was sat next to the tea lady. The other side of the tea lady was the damsel, and we executed, I can't remember which one of us, but we executed one of us to prove the tea lady and prove that we were all good. And unfortunately, before, like, so the tea lady comes and tells me, great, I trust you, you're the huntsman, my other neighbor is the damsel, you should pick them tonight. Unfortunately, that player ended up afflicted with madness, and something distracted them during that day,
Oh
and
no.
they broke their delirium. Sorry, they broke the delirium, and then Tyler was like, yeah, delirium kills through everything, including protective rolls, so my damsel just fucking dies on the
Oh.
spot. I'm like, no, we were all confirmed good.
I actually have a question
I
for
don't know
you.
that you would have been we had if you go back to Lost in the Woods, Alejo, um,
Oh, we did. Oh, we did. You're
Andrew the
right.
damsel,
I was
yeah,
evil in
got
that
turned
game.
into Slayer.
Yeah,
And
you're
I
right.
think,
I was
yeah,
evil in that game. I guessed them as the damsel, but I was too late.
you were the demon and you
Yeah,
weren't the
that's right.
minion.
Yeah, I
The
was lying
damsel was
about being evil.
given
I was too
the
late.
damsel was given a choice, right? Of like, you can take the path of like power, the path of something, something, whatever. And they chose, I
Yeah,
think it was
the
the path of power,
Path
and
of
that's what turned him into
Innocence
the
and
Slayer.
Path of Vengeance. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
fun.
I actually have a question for you on this one, Navean, because I don't know if you were in the game, but I've spoken to a few people who were playtesting the legacy games, um, and I think it was gambling that was in the first time this one was playtested, um, and uh, I think that Nikki was also playing, and nobody could tell if it was a legacy mechanic or just Nikki being Nikki.
I was not in
Oh,
the
you weren't in
first
that one.
playthrough of this. No.
Do you remember that
I
one, Tyler?
missed
Sorry, go
maybe
on.
about like half or 2/3 of the actual playtests because Tyler did them kind of what for me is early in the day. So I ended up sleeping through quite a lot of them.
That's a
Half
shame.
the time that I was there, the ones I was there for, was because I hadn't slept.
Yeah, I think it was running at like 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning or something a lot of times.
Yeah.
And it was just like, people are like, why are you doing this? And I was like, well, I don't know. It's kind of how my brain works. I'm sharpest then. I think I know what you're talking about though, Alejo, because it was Nikki as the courtier. Um, and
Just singing
he ended up,
everything.
well, he ended up drunking he drunk the matron, um, and because he was trying to prove himself. And I think I decided because in the way the delirium works, if people aren't familiar with it, if they didn't watch this, delirium, like I said, is a madness adjacent ability, but it's not tied to any evil roles. And it's not actually designed to make it to where it's like the evil team is more effective or anybody is less effective. If you go through the delirium effects, it's like you got to say everything in a sing-song voice. You got to say everything as quickly as possible. And then the third one was you have to. This was the only one that we had to. This got modified from playtesting, and I was very. I was grateful for the feedback on this because I didn't want anybody to feel like they were excluded or uncomfortable. But the third ones you had to say everything in a seductive or conspiratorial tone. You didn't have to say seductive things or conspiratorial things. You just had to say it in a certain way. And the mechanic's really not about, which makes it almost not a mechanic at all. If I think of it from a game design perspective, I guess it depends on how you're approaching it. But from a game design perspective, it has almost no bearing on the outcome in terms of wins or losses for either team. What it
I
does is kind of act like this pseudo deviant where you go, but it could, right? If people are just like, I'm rejecting this idea of goodwill and having fun, and so I'm going to piss on this. Well, I guess it could affect the outcome of the game. But in general, that's why it's not tied to execution, right? The day would continue even if this thing happened. If people try to get cute and be like, I'm going to prove that I am, um, I'm going to prove that I am this thing and I'm protected by this, so I'm going to break it intentionally. It's like, that's not the intention of it either. It's meant to show people what makes Alejo as a player, um, I don't want to say talented, but it's true. Like it lets people show kind of like funny sides of themselves as players that they may not get to show the rest of the time, you know? or skills, or hey, let me, oh my gosh, I never knew that so and so was into, like, half the clock tower community is into musicals apparently, and I only knew that because we started doing this, right? So it's like,
I
because
remember
everybody was singing and they wanted to do more of it,
my other
um
my other abiding memory of this game wasn't actually from when I was playing it, but from when I watched it back. Because I watched all of these back at the time, pretty much the day after we ran them. And I just remember, uh, I think it was Duke, and I can't remember who he was talking to, but the tango was in force, and you know where I'm going with this, don't you, Tyler?
yes. Yes, yeah. He was him and
It was
Andrew,
him and Andrew.
or Art. It was no. It was either, I think it was Art. It may have been no, because Art wasn't
Art
in
was
the
playtest, right?
live game. Yeah, he played
Yeah.
test. It was Duke and
I think
Andrew
It
P.
was Andrew, yeah. Um, and Duke is just there because the tango is in effect, which is you must speak in a seductive or
And y'all had
conspiratorial tone.
exiled or killed the matron, I think, at that
Yeah, so
point. Yeah.
everybody had to do it. And Duke was just there, just in his perfectly normal voice, just being like, "Okay, so what did you learn? Okay, I learned this. I learned this. What did you learn? Okay, I learned this, you big sexy man." And they just
Yeah,
continue.
yeah, very flat. I was like, you sure you know how to flirt, dude? Uh, no, yeah, that, and
Truly iconic.
well, I've gone, I've kind of played around with delirium and other delirium type effects that might also kind of be fun, but also might lend themselves to show other things about people's personalities or what they might find interesting, or because that wasn't like, there were people in the game who said they weren't comfortable being seductive, like that term or that idea of doing that was not in their comfort level. And you don't ever want to make a game or experience, um, especially for those players who are super enthusiastic about what you're doing and supportive, and then they go, well, I feel like this is something that I cannot be a part of. You don't want that. You try to make workarounds for that, and be, and still make it fun for them. Um, but looking at other ways that delirium can happen, I think um, there was a game that they Adam and Haley ran with delirium for that mega stream, where they had people
Yeah.
do, Muppet voices and all that stuff. And I thought that was pretty fun and, creative stuff. And
I didn't actually get to see that one at the time because obviously Nathan and I were preparing for our game, which followed yours.
yeah. Well, apparently not spoilers, but I guess Capelli had a very controversial Elmo voice. So is it Elmo? Do we know? You'd have to look for
we
yourself, see for yourself.
we had Dakota in our game, and for some reason they were a lot quieter than usual.
I'm haunted by that Elmo, I guess.
Haunted
Um,
by Randy Macho Man Savage.
Oh yeah, yeah. They snapped into that Slim Jim one too many times. Yeah, that's right. A lot of that stuff. Um, so I think that's like, so the thematic, right, is that it's a ball. It's a dance that will drive people, that they can't stop doing. The party won't stop even if they want it to. So you look at the
Yeah, because it's
townsfolk.
run by the Fey folk, right?
Yeah, they're just going like, well, and there's an apocalypse happening outside, essentially, right? The empire is at war, the streets run red with blood, and the nobility are just like, well, we're crowning a new king, and
We fiddled
we're gonna
while
have a
Rome
party.
burnt.
Yeah. Um, so you end up having a lot of like party style, um, you know, party style townsfolk roles. I wanted to have the king, right? Because the king it's a coronation, but I don't know why I was just like, I don't want to have a choir boy. Either I didn't think it was working, or I wanted room for something else.
And
So I ended up,
you needed to get the Stormcatcher in there somewhere.
yes, and that's true. And that, like, I go back to the original premise was I want to showcase everything. Stormcott King seems like it lines up pretty well, right? And I think the ruling house, were the Storm Wardens or something. They came from that family, maybe. It kind of paralleled in the story a little bit. Um, I'm looking at it, and I guess the script doesn't really need a sentinel, especially since it's got a huntsman. But I had it there, and it kind of did need a spirit of ivory. Though a cult, I will. That's one of those things where you go like on its face, like you really don't want to have a cult leader in a and another, like a Mezephiles in this case, something where if the Mezephiles acts, then the cult leader can never act, right? Or
Right.
not never act, but you're like, well, if we believe that this person got changed by the Mezephiles, then we know that the cult leader's good. We should
And you
just vote
just
on the
always
cult.
vote on the cult. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, that's an interaction that if I were counseling somebody on making a script, I'd be like, eh. But in this case, I didn't feel as bad about it for whatever reason. And I think what I didn't feel bad about is like, so the day phase, and I know this particular aspect of it kind of, Adam was like, what is happening? But the first day you juggle, everybody juggles, everybody gossips, and everybody calls for cult, right? So the day phase is just, this kind of dumb, wild people making broad, boisterous proclamations while singing sometimes. Like, why is that person singing? They weren't affected by delirium. Don't know, not asking, right? People just got into it, right? So they were doing it for, to be a part of the festivities. And I think that kind of ties into this kind of like we're, we're partying so hard that we're just, we're leaning into it, into the hysteria of it all. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of it's got a lot of that kind of stuff. The outsiders fit along with that as well. Um, in the party atmosphere, I think when you get into theming, it's harder to fit um, it's harder to decide like what minions all the time, like which one of these minions reflects the party the best. So I think that those were the ones where I start. Now that you have the core principle, you have to start kind of thinking about like, well, what will make this kind of mechanically balanced or work a little bit better. Um, and then certain roles like the courtier is a weird role to put on scripts because you just you really can't put it on a script with a single demon. You have to have a multiple array of demons, um, and you have to have some minions that may be worth drunking for that time period. I think that's probably one of the weaker things on the script is like, well, I don't really know if the courtier is all that interested in drunking any of the minions, maybe the Mezephiles, but they are really interested in drunking the Poe because that's the highest, from a risk assessment point of view. You go, well, that could really light us up. So we want to do that. That's probably the only one I'm like, don't feel as good about that. But a lot of it, I think, is kind of fun towards that in that regard of like, it keeps the fun going, keeps the temperature high.
I think I were to make a suggestion for this script to turn it into an actual, script without any of the bells and whistles, it would
Mm-hmm.
probably be a spy in for the Mezephiles.
Yeah, I think that's a good one, especially with something like a tea lady. Um,
It solves your
and
spirit
it's
of
always
ivory
fun to
problem as
courtier
well.
drunk the spy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Um,
But
and then
before,
you get
yeah,
interesting interactions between it and the gossip and the juggler. A lot of fun stuff like that. So yeah, I think the spy could be fun. I think that was one of the things. I don't remember all of the constraints I was applying. I say this like somebody made me do it, but there were like these constraints that I kept saying like, well, in the story, I was trying to be loyal to what had happened in the fiction, and when the
sure.
spy was in the early game, like there was a lot of early games with the spy, um, because they were like this military expedition, and that felt right. And then as we got further and further into it, there was like all this kind of like esoteric lore about the the travelers on the road to hell. I don't know if you remember that thread. I kind of dropped it at some point, but there were these travelers that were like metaphysical beings, and one of them had the Mecephalese as a tutor, like a demonic tutor. And so I was reintroducing that idea as we got to the end of like these evil spirit being. But I'm not saying that makes for good script building. This is not my advice.
I feel like I feel like a new spy at the party works, but the Mecephalese will come back in the next script. But before we do move on to the next script, and I am conscious of the time, I just want to put a quick question to Navean, which is that as a playtester for these games, you're seeing the same script run a few times, but a lot of these scripts have hidden mechanics. How is it possible to play a script knowing that it has a twist to it that you don't know, but knowing that you actually do know that twist, but trying to push it to one side for whatever?
So the first time you play it is, of course, the exploration comes in trying to solve where the twist is. The next time you play it, it's not necessarily about solving the twist because you know it and everybody else, well, maybe not everybody else. Like we had a rotating cast of play testers. So for example, I didn't play the first time through of this one. And therefore, anybody who did play in the first round, they didn't tell me anything about what was going to happen here. So when people start talking weird, I don't know what's going on. I just have to run with it. And then I suggest maybe exiling the traveler. And people are like, no, you don't want to do that. And I was like, well, why not? And they were like, well, we're not going to tell you, but trust me, you don't want to do that. So, to some degree, if you have players who weren't in the previous playtest of it, you don't tell them anything, and that can help keep at least some of the sort of newness of it alive. But the other thing is, now that you know what the twist is, what you're attempting to do there is to actually push the mechanics of the script, and it becomes a little bit less about exploring the new, like what is the mechanic, but rather exploring the mechanic itself. Like, how does this impact the game? How does it impact my role specifically, if anything, that kind of thing.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. There were just a handful, I think just two games left to play, and unfortunately the next one, when we ran it, was the shortest.
Yeah, a bit of a dud, huh?
Little bit. I was the rather sad Mecephalese in this game. But you managed to make something of it. You improvised on the fly, or Capelli did in this case, I think. Talk us through this one.
So this was one of the ones that worked really well in playtest, and so the feedback from the playtesters was I wouldn't change anything. It felt to them, everybody that was playing through it, and we did it a couple times, but I will say, because it worked, because it was working well, I probably just moved on from it to try to make sure that the finale was in some kind of state of working operation. And it's not that, that's not like a great excuse or anything, but it is kind of the way it was. It was just like, well, I want to make sure we have a lot of ideas that we're trying to pack into the finale game and want to make it work. I think it was a 3-hour game when we played it, and we were trying to, so in addition to make it work well, make the alternate realities thing work, the labyrinth thing work, the app stuff, like the bot stuff work. I think we put a lot of time into that. But so playtest on Upon a Pale Horse, the idea is that there are these, trying to remember everything about it, but they basically, like, the demon, anytime the demon would change hands, the demon type changed as well, which is part of the idea. And there was also the idea that there could be multiple Scarlet Women in play, to allow for that, the amount of demon changes that were required for these seals to break. I think that was a thing. Oh, yeah, I'm reading it now. 7 players were given the designation of SEALs, and there was different things that the evil team could do with that information. Um, the calamities were there was a lot of interesting stuff that was in there that we did see play out in playtest that we didn't see play out in the game because of an interaction that well, I mean we didn't honestly we just didn't anticipate. And that's on me, right? When you're building a script and you go, yeah, Pitag can make as many Scarlet Women as they want, right? Which is the premise here. Then you should account for the fact that a minstrel can then make people drunk a lot. Can
But
make your
also that
leech
you can
drunk.
have a good Scarlet Woman.
Yeah, and then you have a good Scarlet Woman. Like, so some of it was just like players played in a way that I did not necessarily anticipate, which you should, that's part of, kind of working through a script and trying to understand it. Um, and I think Kohov had an interesting idea there. If I remember, I think that's who it was that ended up making them
Yeah.
the good Scarlet women or woman, because from their point of view, they could. It was as good as making um, it was as good as making somebody an outsider, and they knew for a fact that they could make it, that they wouldn't be stopped from doing it. And I think wasn't the plan, Alejo? Maybe you remind me of this. Wasn't the plan to, from her perspective, co-op perspective, to turn somebody into Scarlet Woman, and then you um, tell them the Mazephiles word, or is that
I
just
don't think
something
so,
that
because
you don't think so? Okay,
I gave I think Wildstar the Zephyr's word on the first day, and as the washerwoman.
yeah. Which is, I mean, like that is one thing I like about Mazephiles, and this is a sidetrack, but I like scripts in which you have a lot of confirmable roles on the townsfolk side, and then you undermine that confirmability with something like the Mazephiles. Um, you could also do it with a bounty hunter, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I think it was just, didn't anticipate this kind of that kind of use of the pit hag ability. I think the reason I didn't anticipate it, I think I've said this publicly a lot. Pit hag is the minion for me that goes rogue the most. And so you should spend a lot of time, I think, if you put it on a script, trying to think about different externalities and what it can do and how it can ruin things for you. Um, but or your demon. Um, in this case, I don't think I'm not saying that that's what co-op did. I'm just being funny about the pit hag, but um, I think when we had play tested it, we'd done a lot of like if there were 2 minions, they were both just Scarlet Women, and so didn't have to worry about what ended up happening there. And then, but I will say the upside of it is Alejo and Navean, that it did. If people thought the minstrel was weak sauce, haha.
Yeah, I think the minstrel. We've said this before, but the minstrel is, I think, the hardest character to balance on a custom script.
Some people would say it's the recluse, but I think the recluse is hard to balance even on its base native script. Um, yeah,
Well,
I think the minstrel is.
you've walked into the Recluse Appreciation Society, I'm afraid.
Well, no, I agree with you. I got this feedback. Well, I won't get into that. Somebody I love and respect was like, I can't believe you're putting recluse on this custom script, and I was like, yeah. Anyway, but yeah, minstrel's an interesting one. That it's
Sometimes,
hard to balance. Like it's
sometimes Nathan and I will build a script for a Tuesday game, and I'll just be like, okay,
uh
what's this script need? And then I just get Recluse. Sorry.
well, no. I mean, I think what's funny about a recluse, and then people can do with this what they will, but it's like you should either go in for a penny or in for a pound with a recluse, where it's like, yeah, everything that can see them, saw them, you know, and you take that, so you could say, well, I really scuttled a lot of town's information. Yeah, but I mean, like, how else would you see somebody as both the you know, the spy or the baron and and the demon, right? There's only one way, right? Anyway, the minstrel is hard to balance because, like, if it's a one minion game, then it doesn't get a lot of. It feels pretty useless. If it's a higher count minion game, it has a lot more chances to stall the game. Its effect on a script, and this is a mistake on my part, right? This is a design issue. Um, the it works on BMR well because it's like, oh, there's a night of no death. Why was there a night of no death? Well, it could have been because somebody was protected, because we executed somebody yesterday and the Zombool didn't get to go off. The Exorcist did this thing. The Poe charged. And on this script, as we look at it, there are fewer. There are a few options that line up with that. Basically, the only option for why the demon didn't kill, and it is they either sunk a kill, they hit somebody that was protected by the innkeeper, or they were Poe charging. So there's a lot less of that ambiguity that makes the minstrel work on multiple levels. And in this case, I think the leech, if I remember correctly, I could be wrong, but I feel like they were trying to do a bluff where they they were either bluffing something that wouldn't die, right? Like a fool, um, something along those lines. So the timing lined up to where when they wanted to test that bluff, or no, they'd done it the day before, right? Or in a previous day, they'd tried to execute the leech. They didn't die. They were playing out of evil, and then the whole thing with the Scarlet Woman minstrel
Yep.
execute him deal happened.
Yep.
It's a
So
tough position.
everyone
It's a
knew
tough
who the
spot.
now drunk leech was.
Yeah, who the drunk leech is, and if there had been a Scarlet Woman there to catch, well, they couldn't catch anyway because they've been drunk.
Yep.
You know, so it was just yeah, it's one of those things where you do have to kind of I think I guess if I was going back, I would be best to just pull the minstrel out and replace it with something else.
Yeah, unfortunately. But we can go from. Actually, what were you thinking? Talk us through the thing that people won't have seen, if they when they go back and watch this when you upload it, which is of course the marks. What were you going for with that?
With the what now?
The marks, the 7 marks.
Oh,
Do you call
okay.
them marks? Seals. Seals.
Seals. Yeah. Um, they, man, what was I think? So there was like it's a biblical thing, right? So the whole idea was this apocalyptic pace, whereas the seals, um, as the seals died and broke, quote unquote, right? That these things would happen that would then lead you into the finale and the kind of sense of pressure building on the group. And let's see, what did I have here? Desolation was the first calamity, and it basically reduced everything down to 2 whisper channels. Doubt inflicted delirium. That's pretty smart. Thinking some good things there. And the calamity of faithlessness changes an existing outsider into the heretic if there isn't one in play.
Nice. Yeah, I think it was like, so there's 7 seals. For every 2 seals that get like die or are killed, one of the calamities happens, and then if the 7th seal dies after that, then I think that was the original intention. There was at that point was when the game becomes a fiddler, I think.
Well, yeah, I think the closest we got to it was a play test in which the demon had tried to play a pretty cunning thing, and it didn't turn out. So I don't know that we ever saw all of the seals be broken. And that may have been a thing that was in flux up into the end, the seals mechanic, because I know it was one of those things where there were things that like I don't know. If you're ever writing something, Navean can speak to this. If, you're making an art piece, you just get like stuck on something. Like I want
Yeah.
to do this. I want to express this thing, right? And it's like, but is that really like? Sometimes you got to kill your, you got to kill your darlings. You got to bust up the golden calf. And I didn't do that here. So I really wanted to do something with the seals. I really wanted to do something with the symbolism of it. I wanted to make it feel like the world was ending around these characters. And unfortunately, it was just like um, the script didn't support it, right? Because you didn't have the momentum of the minstrel kind of defied the momentum there. Though I think some people would sometimes accuse me of making evil leaning scripts. Um, and so good on sorting this out and figuring out a way to win, even when by all rights maybe the odds were stacked against him a little bit.
All right. Well, that's the 3 acts that we've spoken about. But it all finished from the shortest game to the longest game with the Sovereign of Pandemonium. And there is a lot to talk about here. So I think I will just let you talk here.
So I guess the thing that's really interesting about the Sovereign of Pandemonium is that the only original script was not meant to be played by a large player count. And that was a pretty interesting thing. But as we were the
Because
alternate realities thing,
I've put the
say it again.
script. I've put the script on stream so people can see it, but that's not entirely a helpful thing to do, is it? Do you want to explain why?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so in the Sovereign of Pandemonium, it was we learned a lot from the playtest. So the playtest of that finale game, or the finale game, was based on the idea that the players are in this labyrinth, and we built this out in a Discord server where if you went to one Discord channel, you could only see, like, can I go east? Can I go west? Can I go north? Can I go south? Right? Until you found these shrines. And inside of these shrines, you could say, I don't think I said pray, but you go to this shrine and you devote yourself to the shrine. And they were thematic groupings of roles. And all of that is, so this is, you ever had that joke with people? I know this used to be a thing in the past, and people may still bring it up, but is it a night 0 or is it a night 1? When you're doing handout roles and giving out minion information and stuff like that. And so internally, our joke was we made a real night 0 because there's a night where you have no roles. You are, as players, your alignment, but you don't know what you are, and you are trying to get to these shrines because that's how you got to make a choice essentially as to what role you wanted to be within certain, you didn't get to say I want to be this, but if you chose the shrine of the underworld, that was kind of like, or maybe it was called crime at that point. I think I changed the name because it got confusing for people, but they or you would figure, I think roles are going to be about this and this. They're going to be like the goon, or they're going to be like, what's another good Godfather, something like that, right? I kind of know what might be grouped in that shrine's theming, because and the players, God, I don't even remember how much y'all were forewarned. Probably not at all, Alejo. But the characters or the players are sliding through alternate realities, and each of these alternate realities is built around, like, so there's the base 3 scripts that you are moving between from day to day, from night to night. So once you've activated a shrine, maybe you activated the shrine of Peace Song. I think that was one of the houses. You might start in Trouble Brewing as the empath, and then in BMR, so from night 1 to night 2, we would change scripts, and now you are in BMR, and your role is the pacifist. And then in Sex and Violets, maybe you were I don't remember everything, but um, well, I don't know. You were something that is tied to that idea of emotion and peace and music or something like that, right? Maybe it's philo. I think that was pretty close to it. Um, but you're shifting between these different realities that are represented by a script. And so there was also a global madness along with it, where if you said, well, yesterday I was the empath and today I'm this, you would be executed, which is similar to the time loop. It has kind of basis in the time loop game. So there's global madness in effect, and you're trying to gather information from day to day as you are going through these shifting realities. The evil team was always the evil team, but it could change who was the demon and who was the minion from reality to reality. And all of this is leading into, once the players fulfill these missions surrounding the shrines, right? So when they go to their shrine, it would tell them, if they go to a corresponding, like the shrines were tied together in certain ways. And if they go to this other shrine, that you know, it would be part of this mission, right? And they would get missions. I don't remember them all. I think it's probably written in here. But they would have, here's some. So you nominate a player who nominated you, and they are executed, right? So you have these missions that people would then get. And as these missions were completed, certain things would happen in the world around them. They would learn. I remember one of the things that we learned from playtest is like, oh, it's going to be important for the players to know at some point that the final script is an Al-Hadik script, right? Because if they don't know that, and then they go and they're like, well, there's 4 alive, they might be walking into the end of the game and not even realize it, right? So if they completed one mission, it, let's see, I'm trying to remember what the different missions ended up granting them, but I know one of them was they were shown the script, and then at some point they also locked in, and now they have stabilized reality, and they are now in the final script. Well, every time we play tested it, once we'd gotten the kind of the beats of the game down, it was normally there were only 4 or 5 players alive when we got into the final script. And so when I was talking to all the play testers, what should be here, what what do we want that final script to look like? And I would say that's the only one that was really like, I was kind of building by consensus or committee, because we'd had so many people participating, and they had, they were all clever, and they had their thoughts about what might be unfair for one team or another team. And so as we were building out, though, people would say, well, I don't know if you want to have that. Like lycanthrope was one that was a particular point of contention, because, well, it kind of locks out it locks out the Al-Hadik in a way that's not very fun, right? And I would kind of come back and say, well, the chances of the lycanthrope actually being active at this stage of the game are pretty low, because we've never had more than 5 players going into the final script. So think about it like if you were building like a Teensyville script, and then everybody goes, oh yeah. And then I think when we played it on stream, I think there were 8 or 9 players alive, and I was like, oh, well, this is not what we anticipated. But yeah, so I mean, the final script was kind of built around that idea that it would be that it should it should demonstrate all the different roles, or as much as we can, of the game in this one super big game that wraps everything up in a way that makes people feel very fulfilled and like their choices mattered. Because that's really like that's the big important thing when you're doing a legacy, or I mean, I think it's actually just true of Clock Tower in general or anything. People should feel like their choices that they make matter in some way. They have stakes. They have agency. They have influence. Otherwise, why make a choice at all? And so there were things that were supposed to be paid off here. Um, and the things off the top of my head I remember were like the 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 lycanthropes were never eliminated in the early parts of the game, so the lycanthropes should still be active. The Oracle was a bloodlined role from from some actions I think that Harmony made. The Pit Hag was a bloodline role. The Cult Leader was a bloodline role. So there was these roles. We had this mechanic where people could say like, it's got to be there, and so I wanted to pay that off. But as a storyteller and the shrines that people chose, if you get down to like final five, you could do some different things with what's active at that time. And but when it's 8 or 9 alive, you have to fulfill more of these conditions, right? I went to this shrine that was for Silver Strike, and when I went to Silver Strike, I pretty much assumed I was going to be a lycanthrope, right? So you kind of have to pay that off. You have to do something with that for that player. Otherwise, once again, their choice was meaningless, and you don't want them to feel that way. So that's kind of what all went into the Sovereign of Pandemonium. It was a lot of moving parts that we were trying to, get interacting in a way that was fulfilling, and doing it with stuff that we didn't know if it was going to work, like technologically, until right before we went live with it. Jack Broom did a lot of the helped me with a lot of the bot stuff. He made a custom bot that would help send people messages when they went to a shrine. That helped speed things up a lot. And I should say that he did these versions of the scripts that you see in that are had the nice rich script type that's kind of consistent with what ended up coming with the ship game. He had a tool that made that happen. And we wanted to pay off a lot of the different stuff that people didn't see. So Navean didn't just make 3 of the house crests; they made 6 of the house crests, plus some of these non-house shrine crests. We wanted to show off that iconography, and we wanted the labyrinth to feel like it wasn't just a gimmick. It wanted to feel like it was meaningful in what ended up happening. And I think all of that ended up working out really well, even if it didn't go exactly as we anticipated.
And all of that art, I'm pretty sure all of it is currently on screen right now, along with the map that you built. I do remember the bots and receiving my message from the bot. That was such a cool thing that Jack built, and a fun map and a fun finale it was. So we're a little overrun, so we'll try and wrap it up a little bit. But I'm curious to hear, Tyler, what, as a storyteller and as a script builder, you feel that you've learned from doing everything that you did with the legacy games.
I think the thing that I learned the most about it is to you can't always change the mechanics of some of these roles, right? So if you look at it and you go, I want to do something thematic, you can't always modify the roles, even if you feel like they would fit the theming, but you can make little changes at the margin for the theming if it helps make roles interact better. And I know that's a weird takeaway, But if you are interested, like I am, in going, I want to make something that feels like this, or thinks like this, or harkens to this, or calls like you're talking about in the sense of, in a lot of ways, Blood on the Clock Tower has some of that DNA of a role playing game, and I want to speak to that a little bit more. You can add a lot of character to your theming if you don't make, if you're not super strict about the theming at first, right? If you go, I really kind of need to have this role to make this other stuff work, then you can modify the theming to correct for that. I've been thinking a lot of lately about, for reasons I guess I can just specify why in a second here, but I've been thinking a lot about giving players that sense of agency back. I think the draft, or the ability to go to shrines and kind of choose what type of role you were into, was, we got a lot of positive feedback from that from players when we were doing the play test, and we really didn't do much of it after we built this kind of neat tool, between me and Jack, and then the artistic elements from Navean. We built this neat tool for people to have this cool experience, and then we did it like we never did it again, right? After the stream game. And but I think that idea of having people within certain parameters be able to say, these are the kind of roles that I'm interested in. I like roles that have this unifying factor. And as I think about Clock Tower more, and what, can be done with it from another legacy type of campaign, because those are the kind of things that I'm interested in long term. How roles connect. If I say, I want to have, what does it mean to have a role without its partner role? What does it mean to have a professor without a Shabaloth? What does it mean to have a pacifist without a devil's advocate? What does it mean to have these types of roles that kind of are bonded? And beyond that, like, does it take away from the fun if people find these clever loopholes, I guess, in a script? I don't know if that's the best way to look at it, but if you say, like the things that I did not anticipate, I think we agree to a certain extent that players should be rewarded for being, ingenious to a certain, in finding this thing that I didn't see coming, or the scriptwriter didn't see coming. But then there are other things that you should kind of be like, well, that's a known pitfall, and you should be worried, because that will definitely frustrate the experience for other people. So from all of this, I guess that's the thing that I learned the most, is to be flexible. If you want to do something thematic, understand that if you want the experience to be very fulfilling for players, you have to also see the difference between something that can be, that's pretty smart, that's a fun little thing that you did, that's a combo that is neat, and you found a combo that is just frustrating, and you win, but everybody else has a bad time. And you got to see the difference between that when you're doing your script design. I think that takes making a bunch of bad scripts and seeing how, hopefully not. Hopefully people can go out and be like, I'll learn from the mistakes of other people and not do that. But like we were talking about earlier, there might be something in the conventional wisdom that says, you just don't want to do that ever. But in reality, that is probably very, very solid advice, but it's not always. There may be an instance when you want to break that and you want to go and, put that in there. I think one of the things I saw when I was looking at Delirious Dancing that had the Mezephiles, and you were talking about maybe replace it with a spy. I think that's good advice, but I think the Mezephiles, one of the things that also makes it interesting for me, and I like in scripts, is that combination of, here are some roles that are, in that case, it was the Fool, but roles that are confirmable in a certain way, right? Somebody's going to go and say, execute me, because he's going to prove something, and they execute him and then they don't die, and yay, right? They must be good. They must be the Fool. Well, the Mezephiles can then turn that on its head, right? I am now going to go and um, I'm going to go and get the player that is trusted most by everybody and have them join the team, right? That's a possibility. Um, that stuff interests me, but you have to kind of worry about like those other combinations. So it is, script building. When we were doing Blind Man's Bluff, there was a lot of weird things where you go like, well, if I do this and this happens and this happens, and then we got to explain this and why this works differently, and so there are got to have a clear intent. And I think when I ask people why they wrote a script, what they were trying to convey, what they were trying to get across, if they can, the clearer their intent is, the better the advice can be for them and what they wanted to do. Are you trying to showcase these roles? Are you trying to create this type of dynamic? You know, if you stray from that initial premise, why are you doing it? Those types of questions like help frame, for me, what should be on a script. Why do anything different from, some of the really, there's a lot of good custom scripts out there, a lot of good custom scripts writers. And then there's the base 3 scripts, and then there's things that have been built from base 3 roles. So why do you need to keep making? Well, then you should, if you are going to go make something, right? Sometimes it's just, I want to practice this thing. But sometimes it can be, I want to express something. And if that's the case, be clear about what it is that you want to express and use that as that core. Once you have that core, you can build out from there, and you can fit things and you can finagle it to match and fit the core conceit at that point.
Fair enough. Navian, do you have any major takeaways from this discussion or from your time as a legacy playtester?
I mean, I think the biggest takeaway is that playtesting is important and helpful.
Yeah, and that applies to scripts as well as to homebrew nonsense. I use that term affectionately, Tyler.
What was that? What was that phrase that came up?
Legacy bullshit.
Yeah, I almost found gambling and punched him in his pretty mouth. Legacy bullshit. No, yeah.
Legacy bullshit affectionate.
No, yeah. Well, it was funny, it's like it's one of those things where I think in the moment things are like, yeah, I think I get too tightly wound up in something and I go, oh man, that really hurts. And then later on you're like, that's so silly. That it ever like yeah, it is. I mean, it's just like just fun little legacy bullshit. Weird stuff happening. So I think that's yeah, I mean, playtesting is one of the things that's interesting to me about Clock Tower is I'll go to conventions and run games for a lot of newer players, right? And they are experiencing this unveiling of the way the game plays and the way this pings off of this thing and that sense of the emerging meta, right? And I really think like almost in any game for me, I'm just speaking for myself, I guess I should say, is that emerging meta for a game is like that's the sweet spot for a lot of experiences, right? And once it calcifies and hardens and it's just like this is how you play the game and you do this and you do this and and then you win, it becomes less fulfilling over time. And one of the things I think that's great about Clock Tower is that the minute your group has that kind of this is how you do it, this is the meta, this is how you win, right? That then opens up the opportunity for the storyteller and an enterprising evil team to go, aha, we're gonna subvert that, right? And then script building also allows people to do that. The moment you think this is the way the game is played, this is the only way it can be played, you get to challenge that with what roles you put into, are on here on the script, because a lot of times you'll see in a game, this kind of bears on a question you asked earlier about like, is there really only one, was there only one way to run some of these scripts? And sometimes that was true. But there are things that you put on a script that even if it's not in play, it's going to have an impact on how people play, what people attempt to do, what people are worried about. Um, and, that's another bit of juicy, that's a juicy thing to add to the dynamic, adding a marionette and how that makes people approach their neighbors, adding a vortox and how it makes people think about their information, putting a heretic if you want to be really, you know, uh, mess with whether or not up is down and down is up, right? Heretics and atheists and all these kinds of things, they have an impact even if they're not, they become the center of gravity, for lack of a better term, at least in like the early, like a Vortox has a lot of early weight. Marionettes, just, I don't know. Something about the marionette and the way people play when a marionette's on script is just, I don't know, it's just fun.
Yeah,
Uh,
Marionette's a
people,
neat little character.
well, like, and I think it's funny that, Goblin is one of the only minions that like townsfolk will regularly bluff. That to me is interesting. So if you look at your dynamic and you go in your group, or what you're seeing, I think that if when you think about script building, that can be a big part of it. It can be a response. It doesn't always have to be this is my vision, this is what I'm trying to do. It can be, I want to make a statement about the way people are playing the game around me right now. Right? Y'all both have very people come in and out, but y'all have very strong communities. And you'll see those things pop up in a pocket of the game where this community does this all the time. Maybe it's they always go after a certain player and that kind of stinks, but that's what they do. And then, or they, what was it, kill all saints for a while, and those types of things that are kind of meme reactions to the game. Um, it's interesting to do things sometimes with a script that says, I want to play against that. I want to stir that up a little bit. I want y'all to think about the game differently.
But
And I'm going to do it in a script.
You mentioned Kill All Saints as an example, and you say that that was a thing for a while. Does the fact that it was a thing for a while and then you still hear it, but it's mostly died down, does that not show that that's kind of a fairly cyclical meta that kind of deals with itself as an issue?
I don't know if it's, say it's an issue. It's only an issue if you're really in deep in the community, maybe. I think I always, and maybe it's just maybe it's my ego talking or whatever. I view sometimes that some of us have roles where our goal is to make sure that if it's somebody's first experience playing the game, that they get a sense that the game has layers that they want to explore, right?
Absolutely.
You want somebody walking away from the game going, oh man, I could have done this, even if they lost. Oh my gosh, now it all makes sense. Like, you want that, not the, wow, that was a bullshit train wreck from hell, and not for me.
Yeah. No, completely.
And I think some of those meme reactions, those meme plays, are fun for the jaded, folks that like, who cares? The storyteller has to re-rack, And I think what those players are actually communicating in a certain way, like a roundabout way, and not all of them, but there is a seed of like, we don't want to have those kind of conditional game enders in game. And if you put them here, and if it's a bluff, we'll call your bluff and we'll push the button. So for our experience, we don't want that. That's the way I perceive it, for better or for worse. And I think it works itself out. But anytime something is left to kind of work itself out unabated, you do, as a side effect of that, lose people from your community. It's just like if the environment is one where people do this thing every time, and it like me personally, right? I got kids. I got a bunch of fucking kids. I don't have time to go play a pickup game all the time. So when I do, it's an investment on my part, right? And if every game that I play gets derailed with meme plays from people who have a ton of disposable time, well, then I just won't play with them anymore. Does that track?
It
Yeah, no,
does,
I
yeah.
get what you're
And
saying.
you're also not the first person that I've ever heard like with those same similar sentiments.
Yeah, I mean, well, and I mean, I don't think it's wholly original. But it's one of those things where you get into, you sometimes have to think about like, all right, and it's not to like make people not have, like, if people are having fun, then cool, right? And if that's your group and they're having a good time, cool. I'm not dissuading any of that. All I'm saying is but if you're the one going, I am not having a good time with this, and keep in mind, right? People should remember storytellers are players too. And so if your life goal as a player is to make your storyteller miserable all the time, well, that's probably not the healthiest dynamic in the world, and you should think about that. Um,
Unless your storyteller is Capelli, obviously.
unless your storyteller's what? Capelli?
Capelli.
Oh yeah, yeah. Torture
Yeah,
him.
yeah,
Uh,
obviously.
well, it's funny. I'm saying this to somebody who made a script that is totally devoted to the idea of making the storyteller's day a living hell, but in a fun
I
way, right? It's
I
it's,
don't know
it's
what
kind
you're
of a
talking
test of
about.
skill. Yeah, 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 yeah.
And to be fair, it is the storyteller's choice to run that script, so like they're
Sure.
doing it to themselves.
Yes. Yeah. And it does like a test of your own personal mettle, right? Do you have the ability to run this gauntlet? Um, and yeah, but I don't, I think it's just, you can sometimes nudge a group in a way. Not, you don't want to be heavy handed about anything, but just if your group is not into certain kinds of dynamics and um, I think so I brought up the and I don't know that this had the intended outcome I wanted or anything like that. I'm not saying that. But one of the things that in a house divided with the special twin condition, I really was thinking about, I don't like the way that people play twins in the community at that time. I'm not into it. And it makes it to where the twins are not having fun, either one of them, the good one or the evil one. People don't want to see the role in the game. Storytellers aren't putting it in play because people don't want to play it. And sometimes people will, and this isn't good, but there are players that if they get a role that they don't want, they'll throw a game, they'll sabotage the game as a way of saying, you shouldn't give me that. That's bad sportsmanship. I wouldn't encourage it. But one of the ideas behind that particular, you know, that particular script and that particular win condition is I wanted to nudge the twin meta in a different direction. I
I
wanted
mean,
it to make it about something else.
that is a very admirable goal. Um, Unfortunately, I feel like the twin meta is a little bit locked in, a little bit um, kind almost inevitable in online play because it's so easy to exclude someone in an online game that you can't really do in person. It it feels like it's a symptom of online play. It's not a minion that works in the context. I don't think, unfortunately, because I love it in theory. I love it in principle. But yeah, good good twin games on any online server. It's hard to come by.
Well, I had one of my favorite games as a player as an evil twin, but it was because I had a good twin who was willing to, you know, shake up the way people played it, because they were aware that they would be excluded from play
Yeah,
too.
yeah, you see
And
that from time
so,
to time.
well, like, not to get into the evil twin stuff, but that could be the purpose of that can be the focal point of your script. Is
Yeah,
I want to do something that makes it to where the evil twin feels very vital, very useful for the evil team, changes the way people, think about how they want to play it as the good twin. Um, and I understand that it's probably like, it's not the best thing for town to not know that an evil twin is there late into the game. But like, a day or two, it's not the end of the world for town. Town's going to do fine. And it lets those players go around and kind of interact with other folks, and there's interesting things that can come out of that. So,
Yeah,
um,
such games do tend to be a little bit more tolerable. I'd say we can do, because we have our own script competitions that we occasionally run. We could do one in the future that's make the evil twin, build a script around the evil twin that doesn't suck to be an evil twin or a good twin on. But I'm not sure that Navy will go for that because it's not your favorite minion, is it?
No, it is in fact my least favorite minion.
Yeah. Um, but yeah,
well, I mean, that's
it's
the thing. So, I mean, like I said, you're fostering your a community, right? And the scripts that you make and the things that you decide to do or focus on, or you feel are problems, those can. I think that's one of the things that's brilliant, right? With the number of roles, the number of things that are out there, and what you can put into the puzzle, because the script just obviously creates a framework by which a puzzle is then made and then solved, right? Um, or not solved, depending on what happens at the end of the game. But you know, it has such a call and response type of vibe to it. You put something out there, people, uh, you know, they either go, man, I love that. I love the vibe I'm getting from this, or I, you know, the mix up of different roles is just makes me feel like I'm doing more, or I liked being this role here in a way that I never saw it before, that kind of thing. And if that's, I can't think of another game, right, where other than like you said, D&D or a role playing game or something like that, where you get to really put your fingerprint on. I want to change the way people think about the game in the community that surrounds it. The ecosystem. I want to have an impact on that, and you get to do that by building scripts. So that's pretty damn cool.
absolutely. I think we have kept you for quite long enough, Tyler. Um, so before we sign off, I'm going to first of all, Navian, where can people find you?
You can find me here on Tuesdays and frequently on Fridays, and you can find me on Connecticut Blood on the Clock Tower on Fridays.
You can find me here whenever I'm here, which is Tuesdays, every other Monday, most Fridays and Sundays. You can also find me quite easily on the unofficial, because that's where I spend most of my time. And Tyler, you've got the next minute or so, or however long you want to take, to plug whatever it is you want to plug. Go.
They can find me at youtube.com/offmetaplays. They can, obviously, we stream on the Twitch at twitch.tv/offmeta. Um, we play mostly Blood on the Clock Tower, but we have started to branch out into live stream role playing games, live stream board games at different, usually around that kind of hidden movement, hidden role, social deduction thing. But we've been doing a lot in that realm of things. So a lot of off meta work. We got together and got some really cool content come down the pike from our off meta offline meetup. So that should be coming soon. Like I said earlier, the legacy games are soon going to be up there. If you are a Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/offmetaplays. You can see those, at least the first act right now. We just started uploading them to patrons, and they'll be on the YouTube soon. So if you gotta wait around, it'll be up shortly. I promise. Maybe in time for a Yule. So yeah, I think that's what else. Do I do anything else? If I do, I forgot, and I feel bad. But that's where I spend a lot of my time right now. Is
Well,
off meta stuff.
thank you
We
very
play board
much.
games on Tuesday. We play Blood on the Clock Tower on Thursdays, and right now we play role playing games on Sundays. We've got a special role playing game uh, stream coming up December 16th, which is a Friday. I hope it doesn't run into, I don't think it'll run into what y'all are doing. So it'll be kind of afternoon in the United States. We're going to be playing a game called Vesson. Maybe it's one of those V's with like a W, so maybe it's Wesson.
I'm pretty sure
Cool.
it's Vesson.
Yeah, okay. I believe you. But it's a game about fairies and monsters and things like that, stirring up trouble and the people that solve those mysteries in a horror. The original base game is in Norway. Nordic horror is how it's listed, but they came out with a supplement for the British Isles, and so we're going to be using that for a demo.
I wouldn't go there if I were you. It's terrifying.
I've been to at least I've been to London and a big chunk of Ireland, and yeah, what came back was not the same. I was replaced, just a changeling. The original Tyler is a sodden log somewhere.
Stored somewhere in the bowels of Buckingham Palace.
Whoa!
That's what
what
we
a
do.
gig!
That's what we do to every tourist that visits London.
Yeah, I was young too, so I'm sure it was all improvements what got cast out. So,
all right. Well, thank you.
But thank you so
again.
much for having me. I appreciate you.
Thank you for coming. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, as always, Tyler. And thank you.
I miss y'all. Love y'all.
Yeah, we miss you too.
Come by and
I do miss
out.
Sundays. I've been playing a couple of games run by Capelli recently, but you know, I do miss Sundays.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is. Yeah, it's been great to see you. Thanks again, Navean. We will see you tomorrow, of course.
Indeed.
And I will be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock my time, which is 7 o'clock if you're in the UK, or 2 o'clock Eastern, which I think is going to be 3 o'clock your time, Tyler. Yeah, have a
It's
great.
the other way around. Eastern's ahead, so 1.
1 o'clock your time. Time zones. We can talk about time zones all day, and we have, or at least all day my time. Have a good evening, everyone. Have a good afternoon, whatever time it is where you are. Take care. We will see you tomorrow. Good night.
Bye.